So as of late, there's been complaints from Netflix users that when they log on, this screen pops up. Then it just freezes. Now take a closer look. Mosquitos, double helix, and this is a shot of the Americas. Mosquitos all in red. Now most users think nothing of it, back out of Netflix, go back in, everything works fine. But a large amount of them are raising the obvious question. What is it? What does it mean? Some believe it's a warning. Others believe it's the government showing us what's to come, because they believe that when they show us what's about to happen, that it gives them some roundabout right to go through with it. Now by it, I mean this. A Bill Gates funded firm released 150,000 genetically modified mosquitoes into the wild. And by wild, they're referring to the United States, namely Florida. And they will continue to release 12,000 mosquitoes every week for 16 weeks, in hopes that by the end of the year, over 20 million mosquitoes will have been created after mating. Now how does it work and why are they doing this? Well, I'm glad you asked. First, the why. The proposed objective? To curb malaria and the dengue fever. And they're going to do this by using the Aedes aegypti species of mosquito, being that the females of this particular mosquito species carry and spread the diseases while the males simply can't. So Bill Gates funded Oxitec out of the UK would genetically engineer the males to carry a certain gene. This particular trait or gene gets passed on to the offspring, killing the female offspring in the early larva stages, while allowing the males to be born continuously carrying the trait, hoping that by some miracle they can actually defeat Mother Nature and kill off all the females in this particular mosquito species. But good news, guys, they've already ran test trials, so we aren't the guinea pigs. In Brazil, Malaysia, Panama, and the Cayman Islands. Now at this point, Oxitec hadn't received regulatory permission to release them in the United States until recently. It apparently started in May. Notice how this one kind of flew under the radar? And I couldn't help it. As I was reading the articles, a couple questions popped into my head. As a U.S. citizen, I currently live in Michigan. How many people do I know that have ever had dengue fever and or malaria? 0. So of course, I took the liberty to look it up. Here you'll see which countries are the main contributors to the malaria cases worldwide. Notice that the US percentage is so small, they didn't even list it. And as I continued, I found that only 2,000 people in the United States per year get malaria. The vast majority of those cases were immigrants and or travelers from foreign countries. Hardly any domestic cases. And now the dengue fever. Only 70 local transmitted cases in Florida and 10 in Texas. So what's the real agenda here, Bill? Back in the 1950s, an extraterrestrial that claimed to be from the interior of Venus would not only end up working closely with then-President Dwight D. Eisenhower, but he would also end up living in the Pentagon for almost 3 years. His ship would touch down in a local farmer's field in Alexandria, Virginia. And that's when someone seemingly unexpected would step out of the craft. Standing at about 6 foot, 185 pounds, he went by the name of Valiant Thor. Witnesses were baffled as he looked just like any other everyday human. First to approach him were 2 local police officers, guns drawn. That's when Thor would use a quick thought transference. This would immediately convince them that he meant no harm. Wasting no time, they would usher him to the back of the police cruiser, and they were on their way to the Pentagon. Upon arrival, the Secretary of Defense and 6 of his best men would escort him from there on. The 6 armed guards would lead him to a door, and behind it, an elevator that would instantly descend to the deep underground. Once off the elevator, they would board an underground train system, and they were on their way to the White House. Upon arrival, 6 officials, 6 armed guards, and 3 Secret Servicemen would escort him to the office of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. As the president stood up from behind the desk, his Secret Servicemen looked really nervous. That's when Valiant would reach out to shake the president's hand, and they would all pull their revolvers out. Eisenhower would nod, and they would slowly lower their weapons. I come from what your Bible refers to as the morning and evening star, Venus. Can you prove this? Eisenhower says. What do you constitute as proof? Would you like to see my ship? I cannot come and go as I please, the president would say. Well, why don't you stay here for a while? We'll get acquainted, and we shall see. That's when then Vice President Richard Nixon would enter the room. When Sergeant Young from Alexandria radioed in saying you landed in a flying saucer, we thought he'd lost it. And after assuring them that Earth had been under scrutiny for hundreds of years, well before the atomic bombs, they would take him back to the Pentagon. It's here they'd give him an apartment, and he'd spend the next 3 years on Earth. They would employ guards around the clock, but Valiant was prepared for this. On many occasions, he would teleport out of the room to get by them. He kept constant communication with the starship using his uniform. A month or so after his arrival, Val and his team would attend a convention of people interested in UFOs. He and his crew, Don, Jill, and Tanya, would dress in Earth clothes, and he was absolutely disgusted of how the press would treat these people, but was impressed with how on track the UFO enthusiasts were. This legitimate picture was snapped of them. That's when the president would approach the podium holding the letter from Val's High Council in his hand. The letters would ask them to slow down on atomic and nuclear weapons. The president would then say he could not because it would destroy the Earth's economy. Val and his team would stay to work for 3 years on scientific projects. It was at this time Val would introduce him to his uniform. It would undergo rigid tests and pass them off, from high-power rifles to lasers. During his time here, he would become good friends with a man named Dr. Stranges. He would explain that there's life all over on many other planets, in never-ending solar systems. He would also explain that because Venus is 800 degrees on the surface, his people lived inside Venus, with the entrances being in the North and South poles. In late 2002, the Pentagon, using satellites with ground-penetrating radar, would discover a large spherical-shaped cavern with a tunnel leading up to it in the Busegi Mountains of Romania. Now normally they would look past something like this and not think much of it, but recently they had made a similar discovery in the undergrounds of Baghdad, Iraq. The only difference, the one in the Busegi Mountains was much larger, and the mountains had a sphinx nearby. Yes, you heard me, a sphinx, just like the one by the Giza pyramids. So the US would work with Romania and they would both investigate the anomalies. And what they would find would change the course of history as we know it. As the teams approached the entrance in the side of the Busegi Mountains, something would activate. It was a large force field blocking the entrance. Shortly after, one of the US officials would get a call. The one in Baghdad activated as well. So when one activated, so did the other. Initially, 3 soldiers would try to walk through the force field, but they would die of a heart attack instantly. So the officials would have to take a different approach. In order to deactivate the force field, you had to reach a higher state of consciousness. It took quite some time to discover this, but eventually, many were able to do it. When they finally reached the dome inside the cavern, it also had a force field around it. They opened it the same way. In this, what they would later call the projection room, they would discover perfectly cut large tables and chairs, much too big for present-day humans. They would find over 30 ancient texts written on tablets. That when you slid your hand across them, almost as if a smartphone, they would display a holographic image of the origins of the Earth. Not only that, it displayed every creature that's ever inhabited the Earth and how they came to be. Another station would allow you to mix DNA of any 2 creatures on Earth, then produce a holographic image of what they would look like. The room would have 3 doors, one going to the Giza Sphinx, the other going to Mount Kailash in Tibet. The third is said to have gone to inner Earth. That's not all. They would even find a large stone chair with what seemed to be attached to it a helmet. Right away you could see that the helmet was much too large for the average human being. The chair was set for a human about 10 to 12 feet tall, and the helmet would fit the head of this human. They figure it was an automated system that would get you to the highest state of consciousness immediately. Eventually, they would discover that it actually allowed you to use your astral body to time travel. As they proceeded, the discoveries would become even more magnificent. Continue downstairs to a lower level. Here they would notice a pillar-shaped chest in the middle of the room. After figuring out how to unlock it, they opened the lid. They would notice a beautiful white light emanating from the chest. Inside was a white dense powder. This would become known as monoatomic gold. This substance would cause a lot of diplomatic tension due to the fact that when consumed, this stuff could make you live for 1,000 years.